Well, hello, and welcome back. You have arrived back on a very blustery evening. The wind is blowing and the trees are rustling, so if you hear something bumping, creeping, crawling, there are no beasties, there are no creatures, there are no creepy crawlies here. Only the wind and the leaves to keep us company while we dig in to another chapter of the Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell. Now, we are ready for Chapter 8, entitled A Hidden Place. The northern tip of the Sleeping Kingdom was an ugly and vacant place. It was known for its bare trees, bumpy paths, and dangerously high cliffs. Small stones were scattered on the earth, making it nearly impossible to travel by carriage. Even though it rained every so often, nothing ever grew, making it impossible for any animals to live there. In the middle of this dry and deserted place was a small castle surrounded by a deep and empty moat. It was ancient and made of dark bricks, wooden doors, and had been through years of decay. No one knew who had built the castle or why it had been built, but then again, very few people even knew of its existence. The inside of the castle was covered in a thick layer of dust. Cobwebs almost as old as the castle were on every windowsill, even though there were no spiders to be found. All the rooms and corridors were empty, except for the occasional decrepit chair or table placed in a corner. A great hall completed the eastern wing of the castle. Floor-length windows bordered the hall, letting in a lot of light, but they were so old the glass was distorted, the glass distorted the outside world. The castle couldn't have been a less desirable place to be, but for one woman, it was the perfect place to hide. Somehow, the evil queen had escaped the dungeons of Snow White's palace. She managed to get a hold of her magic mirror and traveled to a place where she knew she would never be found. The castle acted as the perfect sanctuary where she could finish the work she had started so long ago. The evil queen was not a stranger to this place. Over the last century or so, many people had come to the castle, but only she and a few others were fortunate enough to have left it, including someone the former queen had not seen in a great while. She had recently sent word to this old friend asking him to come and aid her. And so she waited for him to arrive, knowing that he would any day now, for he owed her his life. The evil queen stood facing her magic mirror with her open palms and closed eyes. She was quite calm for being the most wanted woman alive. To her right, resting on a short stool, was the heart of stone she had always kept close. Although it was one of the most infamous objects in all of the kingdoms, very few people had ever seen the evil queen's magic mirror. Many believed it was made of glamorous materials, like gold and diamonds, and glass so pure one would swear they could walk right through it. In reality, the mirror was tall and wide, with a black frame that peaked at the top. Tangled vines made of cast iron wove through the frame. The reflection was cloudy, as if it were a glass doorway into a very cold and foggy place. Although there was very little moisture in the air, precipitation dripped down the glass. The evil queen opened her eyes and gazed deep into the mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, how long till the huntsman answers my call?" she asked it. The ghostly silhouette of a man appeared in the reflection. It spoke slowly and softly, with a low and hoarse voice. "While my queen awaits an old friend once dear, the huntsman travels very near." The man in the mirror slowly faded away. Within moments, 3 loud knocks came from the other side of the great hall doors. "You may enter," the queen said. The doors opened, creaking terribly, and a man entered the hall. He was tall, broad, and just on the verge of old age. He wore a variety of animal skins and had a limp in his right leg. His beard was light brown and graying. A crossbow was attached to his back, and a large hunting knife hung from his waist. "My huntsman has returned," the evil queen said. The huntsman walked across the hall to where the evil queen was standing. "It's been a long time since I last saw your face," she said, "and I still find it hard to stomach looking at you." The huntsman fell to his knees and wept at her feet. "Your Majesty," the huntsman cried, "please forgive me, for I have never forgiven myself after failing you." The evil queen looked down at him coldly. She had no sympathy left inside her for anyone. "After all you had done for me, and after all the mercy you had shown me, I could not kill the princess in the forest," the huntsman said. "And just look at all the pain it has caused you. Had I just done as you asked, you would still be queen." The evil queen let his pathetic sobs continue for a while longer. She showed no sign of forgiveness. He deserved to feel this way. She stepped away from the huntsman and peered through a window at the lifeless land that surrounded them. "You and I were both prisoners of this castle once," the evil queen said. "I never imagined that one day it would act as my only refuge." "You saved me," the huntsman said. "I surely would have died here had it not been for you. That is why I swore to you that I would do anything to assist you with your mission. But I failed you. And after all this time, I am still on the same mission as I was back then, so do not cry, old friend. I have called you here for a chance at redemption." She walked back to him and gently placed a hand on his cheek. The huntsman stopped crying and looked up at the queen with huge, sad eyes. "Redemption?" the huntsman asked. "You mean, Your Majesty, you're still giving me a chance to serve you after what I've done?" The huntsman's tears quadrupled in size, and he continued sobbing. "Curse this world for claiming you to be anything less than the saint that you are. I'd kill every person who's tarnished your name if I could." "That won't be necessary," the evil queen said. "I have another task for you. It requires a great deal of traveling, and since being the most wanted fugitive alive prevents me from doing it myself, I've called you here." The huntsman grew quiet and lowered his head shamefully. "Your Greatness," he said, "I have grown too old to travel. I can barely walk as it is." The evil queen looked down at him with an angry brow. "You imbecile," she said, raising her voice. "You mean to tell me you traveled all the way here just to tell me you're useless?" The huntsman rose to his feet with difficulty. "Not at all, my queen," he said. "Please let me explain. I'm far too old to serve you, but my daughter is able and willing to help you complete what I cannot." "Daughter?" the evil queen asked. The doors at the hall opened again. This time, a woman entered, dragging a large wagon behind her. She was tall and thin, with hair so dark red it seemed to have a violet tint. Her eyes were bright green, and her clothing was made entirely of plants and leaves and other greenery. The wagon she pulled contained a large square object. It was large and flat and covered in a silk cloth for safety. After seeing her, the evil queen could recall a time many years ago when she had known the huntsman's daughter. She had always been a shy little girl and lived with her father in the palace when the evil queen was on the throne. "You've grown up," the evil queen said. The huntsman's daughter nodded in her direction. "You will speak when I address you," the evil queen demanded. "My daughter is mute, Your Majesty," the huntsman said. "She's never said a word in her life. However silent she may be, it does not make her any less capable of doing what you ask of her. She's brought you a gift to prove herself." The huntsman's daughter carefully removed the object from her wagon and gently placed it beside the queen's magic mirror. Once it was positioned correctly, she moved the silk cloth. It was a mirror, smaller than the magic mirror. It was circular, with flowers engraved into a square golden frame. The evil queen knew exactly what it was the second it was revealed. "The Mirror of Truth," she said. The former queen had acquired it during her reign. It was another magic mirror that showed one's true self when one stood before it. "How did you get this?" the evil queen asked. "She broke into the palace to retrieve it for you," the huntsman said. The evil queen touched the Mirror of Truth's frame. She had forgotten the detail in its carvings. She turned and faced the huntsman's daughter. "You shall be my huntress," the evil queen declared. The huntress bowed and kissed the queen's hand. "What is the task at hand, your majesty?" the huntsman asked. "Have either of you ever heard of the wishing spell?" the evil queen asked. The huntsman and the huntress curiously looked to each other. "No, my queen," the huntsman said, "unless you are speaking of the old foolish fable." "The very one," said the queen, "and I never took it seriously until I recently heard a prisoner in the dungeon mumbling about it moments before his execution. According to the foolish fable, after a group of select objects are collected and placed together, the collector is granted one wish. It doesn't matter how great or small the wish is guaranteed to be granted, and as you know, I have a wish to be granted." "You want my daughter to collect these items for you, then?" the huntsman asked. "Precisely," the evil queen said. "From what I've learned, the task is very dangerous and may take some time, but if she succeeds, I will consider whatever debt you owe diminished." The huntsman looked to his daughter, and the huntress nodded. "Very well," he said, "she will do it. What are the items you seek, my queen?" The evil queen took her place before her magic mirror, extended her open palms, and gazed deep inside it. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, what must we seek for the wishing spell that grants all?" she asked. The ghostly silhouette appeared again. "Glass that housed a lonely soul up till midnight's final toll. A saber from the deepest sea meant for a groom's mortality. The bark of a basket held in fright while running from a bark with bite. A stormy crown that's made to share found deep within a savage lair. A needle that pierced the lovely skin of a princess with beauty found within. A wavy lock of golden rope that once was freedom's only hope. Glittering jewels whose value increased after preserving the false deceased. Teardrops of a maiden fairy feeling neither magical nor merry." "There you have it," the evil queen said to the huntsman and the huntress. But the magic mirror was not finished. "But listen to this, my fair queen, for I offer you a fair warning. For one wish you are willing to pay any price, unaware that the wishing spell can only happen twice. And the spell can only happen once more, for it was already used once before. In this castle as we stand, a duo move throughout the land. A young brother and sister collect at a quick pace, and may defeat my queen in the wishing spell race." The man in the mirror faded away, leaving the queen with the worst possible news. Not only was someone else after the objects she needed, but if they were used before she could collect them, the spell could never be used again. She closed her eyes and thought about what her next move would be. She couldn't afford to have any more odds stacked against her. After a lifetime of work, she wasn't about to let 2 children stand in her way. "I want you to retrieve the items," the evil queen said to the huntress. "I will handle the brother and sister. Now leave me." The huntsman and huntress bowed and left the queen alone in the great hall. The evil queen stood before the mirror of truth. Years of being prisoner had taken its toll on her appearance. It was painful for her to see the aging woman who her reflection had become. She picked up her heart of stone and examined it closely, lightly stroking its sides. The evil queen looked back up at the mirror of truth. This time, there was no reflection of the disheveled woman she had grown into. This time, the face staring back at her was a youthful one. It belonged to a beautiful young maiden with pale skin and long dark hair. She wore a long white dress with a matching ribbon tied round the waist and was also holding the heart of stone. The girl smiled, but the evil queen did not smile back. She knew the girl in the mirror very well, and she was not Snow White. Well, there we have the end of chapter 8. We'll have to wait until next time to find out what happens in chapter 9, which is called The Charming Kingdom. I would hope that there's at least a prince there. I guess we'll find out. But until then, the blustery night has quieted down a little bit. and getting a little sleepy. So I guess that must mean it's time for me to go to bed. Good night.